Donald Trump is a criminal who was found guilty of 34 felony counts.
The discussion opens with a sharp critique of Donald Trump, portraying him as a convicted criminal with 34 felony counts related to fraud and someone held liable for sexual abuse. The speaker accuses Trump of habitual lying, manipulating the stock market, and engaging in abusive behavior. They argue that when Trump speaks about rapists and criminals, he's essentially describing himself, a pointed jab suggesting his hypocrisy. The audience responds with applause, signaling agreement with this harsh assessment. However, the conversation shifts to a broader reflection on political and cultural divides, particularly praising someone for their courage in opposing what's described as the woke movement. This individual, despite being a liberal, is commended for acknowledging biological distinctions between men and women, a stance framed as bold in today's polarized climate. The speaker emphasizes that this act of defiance against progressive orthodoxy required significant moral courage, surpassing even that of some religious leaders who, in their view, succumb to the pressures of cultural trends. They argue that until the influence of this vocal minority, estimated at just 10% but disproportionately loud, is curtailed, political success for conservatives will remain elusive. The speaker invokes Franklin D. Roosevelt's famous line, "I welcome their hatred, their defiance, and willingness to face backlash." The conversation then highlights the value of open dialogue between individuals with starkly different worldviews. One participant, an evangelical Christian, engages with another, a well-known atheist, in a discussion that's lauded as a model for what America needs more of: civil discourse despite deep philosophical and religious disagreements. The Christian praises the atheist for pushing back against progressive excesses, suggesting that this shared skepticism of certain cultural trends could serve as a bridge between them. However, the speaker gently challenges the atheist to consider aligning more closely with conservative values, questioning what prevents a fuller embrace of this perspective. The response emphasizes the importance of maintaining perspective, a quality the speaker believes much of the political left has lost. They cite a statistic: 72% of Black Americans under 30 express optimism about their future in the U.S., a figure notably higher than their white peers of the same age. This challenges the narrative of systemic despair often pushed by progressive voices. The speaker also takes a sarcastic swipe at the idea of renaming Captain America to Captain Stolen Land, mocking what they see as an overreach in reinterpreting national symbols through a lens of historical guilt. The focus then shifts to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez AOC, who is depicted as reeling from a public confrontation with the two discussants. According to the narrative, AOC's image is crumbling after being thoroughly criticized on national television. Her attempt to revive a Trump impeachment narrative is described as a miscalculation that backfired spectacularly, leading to what some call a total meltdown on live TV. The speaker portrays her as scrambling to salvage her reputation through frantic interviews, social media posts, and carefully crafted statements that fail to mask her panic. They suggest her actions are driven by raw ambition, specifically her sights on a 2028 presidential run. Every move she makes, they argue, is calculated to build her personal brand rather than serve the public. The viral clip that sparked this spiral is cited, where one of the discussants argues that true love for America is incompatible with hating half its population or disparaging its cherished traditions. This critique is framed as a devastating blow to AOC's narrative, exposing her as someone who claims to love the country while pushing divisive policies and alienating those who disagree with her. The speaker delves deeper into AOC's political strategy, accusing her of leveraging identity politics and extreme progressive agendas to fuel her rise. They argue she's not fighting for ordinary Americans struggling economically, but rather chasing headlines, influence, and votes. Her every action, dramatic speeches, viral congressional moments, emotional rants is described as part of a carefully orchestrated playbook aimed at securing the presidency. However, they claim this strategy is faltering as her mask slips, revealing a self-serving politician hiding behind catchy slogans and theatrical displays. The discussants, particularly the atheist, are credited with igniting this unraveling by calmly dismantling her contradictions and performative moralizing. The speaker asserts that AOC's reliance on outrage to stay relevant has backfired, as her base begins to see through the act. Specific examples are cited to bolster this critique. AOC is accused of claiming America inherently hates women because of underrepresentation in government, a statement framed as dismissing the competence of elected officials and erasing the progress of women who earned their positions through merit. Rather than advocating for equality, the speaker argues she demands preferential treatment and labels dissenters as bigots. Similarly, her response to the overturning of Roe v. Wade is portrayed as divisive, with AOC allegedly painting herself as morally superior while dismissing millions of Americans' views. Another example involves her blaming national issues like chaos in Los Angeles on Trump, despite local leadership being responsible. The speaker contends these moves aren't about solving problems, but about generating viral moments to keep her in the spotlight. They argue her brand depends on division, not unity, and that she thrives on chaos to maintain relevance. The narrative then circles back to the broader cultural critique, accusing AOC and her allies of portraying America as an irredeemably flawed nation, racist, oppressive, and built on theft. This worldview, the speaker argues, ignores the opportunities America offers, which draw people from around the world to its shores. They highlight the sacrifices immigrants make to reach the U.S., driven by its promise of freedom and prosperity, a reality AOC allegedly overlooks in her quest for power. Her platform, they claim, is built on tearing down the very country that elevated her, a contradiction that undermines her credibility. When challenged by the discussants, AOC is said to have responded with emotion rather than facts, a reaction that exposed her fragility and validated their critique. Her subsequent attacks on Trump are framed as a desperate attempt to deflect attention from her own shortcomings. The speaker also addresses AOC's reaction to a recent Trump achievement, a historic Middle East peace deal. Rather than acknowledging this bipartisan success, she allegedly called for his impeachment, a move described as transparently self-serving. They argue this wasn't about accountability, but about redirecting the narrative to protect her own image. AOC's history of performative stunts, like staging an arrest for a photo op or frequently shifting positions, is cited as evidence of her lack of principle. Her credibility, they claim, is eroded, yet she persists in using Trump as a distraction to avoid scrutiny of her record. The discussion also touches on a recent controversy involving Elon Musk, accused by AOC and her supporters of making a Nazi salute. The speaker dismisses this as a baseless smear, arguing that Musk's gesture was innocuous but twisted into a scandal because he challenges progressive priorities like government overreach and media bias. They suggest that if Musk aligned with leftist causes, his actions would be celebrated, revealing the hypocrisy of his critics. AOC's involvement in this narrative is framed as part of her broader strategy of weaponizing outrage to maintain relevance, even at the cost of truth. Throughout, the speaker emphasizes that AOC's tactics, smearing opponents, deflecting criticism, and stoking division, are losing effectiveness. They argue that Americans are increasingly seeing through her performance, recognizing it as a calculated bid for power rather than a genuine movement. The discussant's critique, particularly the atheist's measured takedown, is credited with accelerating this awakening. The speaker concludes by asserting that the truth will ultimately prevail, despite AOC's attempts to manipulate the narrative. They encourage the audience to stay engaged, reject the act, and seek out unfiltered perspectives, framing their critique as part of a broader push for clarity in a chaotic political landscape.